The static crackles through the headset, a Morse pattern bleeding through the interference. Dover, England, March 1944. In a cramped signals hut overlooking the channel, Captain James Holloway sets down his pencil and stares at the encrypted message he's just fabricated from thin air. Outside, the wind carries salt spray against the weathered boards. Inside, 3 men are about to change the course of a battle that hasn't happened yet. Holloway keys the transmitter one more time, his finger precise on the brass telegraph key. The message flows outward into the night, a carefully constructed lie wrapped in authentic encryption. Somewhere across the channel, in a concrete bunker near Calais, German radio intercept operators are copying every dot and dash. They don't know it yet, but they're taking the bait. The deception is elegant in its simplicity. Make the enemy believe what they already suspect. Let them confirm their own assumptions. Then watch them commit their forces to defend a beach that will never see an invasion. Before we continue the story of how a single fake transmission helped seal Germany's fate in France, make sure to hit that subscribe button and tell me where you're listening from. Which city? Which state? I'm curious to know who's brave enough to discover what happened to the men who turned radio waves into weapons. Holloway wasn't always in the deception business. 6 months earlier, he'd been a signals officer with the 3rd Infantry Division, manning radio posts during the Sicily campaign. He understood frequencies, encryption, and the rhythm of battlefield communications. What he didn't understand, not until Lieutenant Colonel David Strangeways recruited him in October 1943, was that radio silence could be just as powerful as radio noise. Strangeways ran a unit that didn't officially exist. Its designation was simply Special Means, a bureaucratic euphemism for the art of making the Wehrmacht see ghosts. They operated out of a requisitioned manor house in Buckinghamshire, where radio operators, artists, engineers, and intelligence analysts worked 16-hour shifts crafting an alternate reality. Their tools were transmitters, inflatable tanks, recorded sound effects, and carefully timed radio traffic that simulated entire army divisions. The principle was ancient. Make your enemy fight the war you want them to fight, not the war they're prepared for. But the execution required modern technology and medieval cunning. Every fake radio transmission had to match the signature of a real unit. The same encryption protocols, the same sending patterns, even the same operator's distinctive fist on the telegraph key. German signals intelligence was too sophisticated to fool with sloppy work. Holloway learned quickly. He studied captured German intercept logs, noting what details the Abwehr paid attention to. They tracked transmission frequencies. They cataloged call signs. They built vast networks of suspected Allied unit locations based purely on radio traffic analysis. This meant every fake message had to be perfect, not just in content, but in context. By February 1944, Holloway's team was transmitting as if they were the 17th Armored Division, a completely fictional formation supposedly based near Dover. They sent weather reports, logistics requests, and mundane administrative traffic. Nothing dramatic, nothing that screamed deception operation. Just the routine electromagnetic signature of 30,000 men and 300 tanks preparing for something big. The Germans were listening. Intercept logs confirmed it. Abwehr Station 312, operating from a fortified position outside Calais, was copying every transmission. Their analysts were plotting the fictional division's location, strength, and readiness on maps covered with colored pins. The deception was working. But working wasn't enough. Operation Fortitude, the overall Allied deception plan, required more than just convincing the Germans that Dover held a massive invasion force. It required convincing them that Dover's invasion force would strike Pas de Calais, not Normandy. It required them to keep 2 full Panzer divisions and 14 infantry divisions tied down, defending the wrong stretch of coastline, while the real invasion force hit the beaches 200 miles west. That's where the fake radio message came in. Not a single transmission, but a carefully orchestrated crescendo of false intelligence that would peak on June 5, 1944. Hours before the real D-Day landings began. Holloway didn't know the invasion date. Security compartmentalization meant signals operators like him worked blind, following orders from officers who themselves knew only fragments of the larger plan. But he understood the urgency. March bled into April, and the tempo of fake transmissions increased. His team began sending encrypted traffic suggesting the 17th Armored was conducting embarkation exercises. They simulated radio checks between ships and shore stations. They created the electromagnetic signature of an army preparing to cross the channel. The work was exhausting. 12-hour shifts at the transmitter, maintaining the fiction hour after hour. Holloway's fingers grew calloused from the telegraph key. His handwriting deteriorated from transcribing endless fake logistics reports. But he never broke character. The 17th Armored Division existed because he said it existed, dot by dot, dash by dash, across the airwaves that connected England to the German listening posts across the water. On April 18th, Strangeways called Holloway into his office. Rain hammered the manor house windows. The lieutenant colonel looked like he hadn't slept in days. "We've got confirmation from Ultra," Strangeways said, using the code name for Britain's program to decrypt German communications. "They're buying it. Abwehr assessment places 2 fake divisions in our sector. They're reinforcing Calais." Holloway felt a strange mix of pride and unease. Men would die based on where the Germans positioned their defenses. His fake radio messages were moving real Panzer divisions like pieces on a chessboard. "There's more," Strangeways continued. "We're escalating. Supreme Headquarters wants the enemy convinced that invasion is imminent, but in the wrong location. You'll be transmitting new traffic starting May 1st. Heavier volume, higher urgency. Make them think we're about to launch. While the real invasion goes to Normandy?" Strangeways didn't answer directly. "While the real invasion goes where it needs to go. Your job is to keep German eyes on Calais until it's too late for them to redeploy." Hauptmann Otto Reyler sat in the basement of Abwehr headquarters in Paris, studying intercept reports by the light of a single desk lamp. It was 2300 hours on May 2nd, 1944, and the paperwork never stopped. Radio intercepts, agent reports, coastal reconnaissance, all of it flowing across his desk in an endless stream of intelligence assessments that demanded immediate analysis. Reyler was good at his job. 15 years in military intelligence, including 3 years tracking Soviet communications on the Eastern Front. He understood the patterns, the gaps, the telltale signs of enemy deception. Which is why the signals traffic from Dover troubled him. Too perfect. That was the problem. The British 17th Armored Division transmitted with textbook precision. Their encryption was strong, but not unbreakable. German cryptanalysts had cracked enough messages to confirm the unit's identity and general location. The traffic patterns suggested a major formation preparing for embarkation. Everything pointed to a cross-channel attack, focused on Pas de Calais. Everything. That was what bothered him. In Ryle's experience, real military organizations generated messy intelligence. Contradictions, gaps, unexpected movements. But the Dover signals traffic was almost choreographed in its consistency. Week after week, the same pattern. Increased activity, embarkation preparations, logistics buildup. No surprises, no deviations. He picked up his red pencil and marked 3 intercept reports for follow-up analysis. Then he drafted a memo to his superior, Oberst Georg Hansen, expressing his concerns about the Dover signals intelligence, recommending increased skepticism regarding enemy radio traffic from Dover sector. Ryle wrote in careful German script. Patterns suggest possible deception operation. Volume and consistency of transmissions exceed normal parameters for armored division. Recommend corroboration through aerial reconnaissance and agent networks before committing defensive resources based solely on signals intelligence. The memo went up the chain. It reached Hansen's desk on May 5th. It was read, considered, and ultimately dismissed. Not because Hansen disagreed with Ryle's analysis. Hansen was himself a skeptic, a professional intelligence officer who understood that the British excelled at deception. But Hansen had other intelligence pointing to Calais. Reports from agents, aerial reconnaissance photographs showing landing craft concentrations. Even diplomatic chatter suggesting Patton's First Army Group was preparing for the main invasion thrust across the narrowest part of the channel. The signals intelligence from Dover fit the larger intelligence picture. It confirmed what multiple sources were already suggesting. And in May 1944, with invasion clearly imminent, the German High Command couldn't afford to ignore a major threat based on one officer's intuition. Hansen filed Ryle's memo and kept the Panzer divisions at Calais. Holloway's team went into overdrive. May brought longer days and shorter nights as the deception operation reached its climax. The fictional 17th Armored Division now transmitted constantly. Command nets, logistics nets, even simulated conversations between tank commanders conducting pre-embarkation checks. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A German spy operating in Britain, a double agent controlled by MI5's 20 Committee. His codename was Garbo, and his reports to the OB there had been carefully scripted by British intelligence handlers to reinforce the Calais deception. In late May, Garbo sent a message confirming that he'd personally observed heavy armored concentrations near Dover, including distinctive markings matching the 17th Armored Division. The Germans already believed in the Dover threat because of the radio traffic. Garbo's report, from a trusted agent with an established track record, sealed it. Now the Abwehr had signals intelligence and human intelligence pointing to the same conclusion. Ryle saw Garbo's report cross his desk on May 28th. He read it twice, feeling his earlier skepticism waver. Perhaps he'd been too cautious. Perhaps the Dover buildup was real after all. He picked up his red pencil, then set it down again without marking the document. Across the channel, Holloway transmitted another carefully crafted message simulating embarkation orders for a tank battalion. His fingers moved automatically now, after months of practice. Dot, dash, dot, dash, dash, dash. The fictional battalion would board fictional ships and sail toward a fictional invasion that would never occur. But there was nothing fictional about the Panzer divisions waiting at Calais to meet them. June 5th, 1944. The real invasion force was 12 hours from H hour. 150,000 Allied troops aboard 5,000 ships were crossing the Channel toward Normandy beaches the Germans had fortified but not heavily reinforced. The weather was terrible. Low clouds, rough seas, a forecast that made commanders question whether to proceed. Eisenhower gave the order. Go. At the same moment, Holloway's team in Dover launched their final phase. The radio traffic increased to a crescendo. Simulated embarkation orders, simulated ship-to-shore communications, weather reports from the Dover sector. Everything suggested imminent invasion in Calais. The transmission that would become famous in intelligence histories went out at 0300 hours on June 6th, 3 hours after the Normandy landings began. It was encrypted using British codes the Germans had partially broken, intentionally compromised codes that let the Abwehr crack just enough to understand the message. 17th Armored, prepare for embarkation phase final. Execute on signal. Stand by for crossing orders. German intercept operators at Station 312 copied the transmission. It reached Paris within 30 minutes. By 0400, it was on General Blumentrit's desk at Wehrmacht headquarters. By 0500, as American paratroopers were fighting in Norman hedgerows and British infantry were wading ashore at Sword Beach, the German High Command was still convinced that the main invasion would hit Calais. The Panzer divisions stayed in place, waiting for an invasion force that existed only in radio waves and carefully planted reports. Ryle saw the intercept at 0600, just as reports of the Normandy landings were reaching Paris. He understood immediately. The Dover signals traffic had been a deception from the start. The carefully consistent pattern, the corroborating agent reports, the mounting evidence, all of it had been manufactured to fix German forces in place, while the real invasion struck elsewhere. He felt no satisfaction in being proven right. Men were dying in Normandy because the Panzer divisions were here in Calais, defending against ghosts. The beaches at Normandy were chaos, but survivable chaos, because the German armor that could have crushed the invasion was 200 miles away. The 12th SS Panzer Division sat near Calais, engines idling, waiting for orders to move. Those orders wouldn't come for days. Hitler himself was convinced Normandy was a feint, that the real invasion would strike Calais, just as the intelligence suggested. The Dover radio deception continued for 2 weeks after D-Day. Holloway kept transmitting, maintaining the fiction that Patton's army group was still preparing to cross the Channel. Every fake message bought time for the Normandy beachhead to consolidate. Every hour the Panzers waited at Calais was another hour for Allied engineers to get tanks and artillery ashore. By June 20th, the game was over. German reconnaissance finally confirmed that Dover held no invasion force, that the 17th Armored Division had never existed, that the months of radio traffic had been an elaborate fiction. But by then, the Allies had landed 850,000 men and 150,000 vehicles in Normandy. The beachhead was unbreakable. Strangeways called Holloway into his office on June 22nd. Outside, actual summer sun broke through England's perpetual overcast. Ultra-intercepts show the Germans have figured it out, Strangeways said. They know we fooled them. Ryle at the Abwehr has apparently written a rather bitter after-action report calling it the most effective deception operation in military history. Holloway allowed himself a tired smile. Did we make a difference? Montgomery's staff estimates the deception operation delayed German armor deployment by 3 to 5 days. In those 3 days, we landed enough force to hold the beaches against counterattack. So yes, Captain, you made a difference. The numbers would be calculated later, after the war. The delay of the 12th SS Panzer Division to Normandy probably saved between 5,000 and 15,000 Allied lives in the first week of the invasion. The continued German conviction that Calais remained the target kept two entire panzer divisions out of the battle during the critical consolidation phase. All because a handful of men in a signals hut convinced an enemy that what they feared most was about to happen, in exactly the wrong place.
The ambush, when it came, wasn't a single dramatic confrontation, but a strategic trap that sprang over days and miles. The Germans, convinced by fake radio traffic and manufactured intelligence, had positioned their forces to defend against an invasion that existed only in electromagnetic signals. When the real invasion struck Normandy, those forces were too far away to respond effectively. But there was one more piece to the deception, a final message that would lead to an actual tactical ambush, not just strategic misdirection. On June 18th, with the Normandy battle still in doubt, Allied intelligence intercepted German orders for the 2nd Panzer Division to finally move from Calais toward the fighting in Normandy. The division would travel by road and rail, a massive armored column that would take days to reposition, but could tip the balance once it arrived. Strangeways saw an opportunity. If the Germans still partially believed in the Dover threat, if they still thought Calais might be attacked, perhaps they could be convinced to delay just a little longer, or better yet, to take a route that would expose them to Allied air power. Holloway transmitted one more message on June 19th. It was encrypted in the older British code system that the Germans had fully broken, ensuring they would intercept and decrypt it completely. The message was brief. 17th Armored Embarkation postponed 24 hours. Weather conditions, Dover sector. Reassess crossing timeline, June 21st. The message went out at 1400 hours. It reached Abwehr Station 312 by 1500. It was decrypted and on General Blumentrit's desk by 1700. The German reaction was predictable. If the Dover invasion force was still preparing, if there was even a remote possibility of a Calais landing in the next 48 hours, then moving the 2nd Panzer Division south would leave the coast vulnerable. Better to wait one more day. Better to keep the mobile reserve in position until the situation clarified. The order went out at 1900 hours. 2nd Panzer Division will delay movement to Normandy until June 21st. That one-day delay put the German column on the roads during daylight on June 21st, when the weather finally cleared enough for Allied fighter bombers to operate. RAF Typhoons and American P-47 Thunderbolts caught the German armor strung out on narrow French roads with nowhere to hide. The attacks lasted 7 hours. Rockets, bombs, and machine gun fire tore through the column. The division lost 60 tanks and armored vehicles before it could disperse into cover. The survivors didn't reach Normandy until June 25th, 4 days behind schedule and significantly weakened. Holloway learned about it from Strangeways 3 days later. The lieutenant colonel showed him aerial reconnaissance photographs of the destroyed German vehicles, charred and twisted metal scattered across miles of French countryside. "That's your work," Strangeways said quietly. "That delay order came directly from the June 19th transmission. You kept them in position long enough for the weather to clear and the fighter bombers to catch them exposed." Holloway studied the photographs, feeling none of the satisfaction he'd expected. Men had died in those vehicles, burned alive when rockets penetrated armor. The mathematics of war were brutal. Kill the enemy before he kills your own side. But seeing the evidence made it real in a way that abstract strategy never could. "How many?" he asked. "Estimated 200 to 300 casualties. 60 vehicles destroyed or disabled. More importantly, the division arrived at Normandy with its combat effectiveness reduced by roughly 30%. Made Montgomery's job a bit easier." The numbers would be added to the final accounting. Operation Fortitude, the overall deception plan that included Holloway's fake radio traffic, delayed German armor deployment long enough to let the Allies establish an unbreakable foothold in France. Military historians would later estimate that the deception operations shortened the war in Europe by months, possibly years. Ryle's after-action report reached Admiral Canaris at Abwehr headquarters in Berlin on July 5, 1944. It was a comprehensive analysis of how the Allies had fooled German intelligence so completely. Ryle documented the fake radio traffic, the double agents, the inflatable tanks, the careful coordination of deceptive evidence across multiple intelligence channels. The report was brutally honest. German intelligence had failed at its most critical moment. They had positioned forces based on enemy deception, leaving Normandy vulnerable. The failure wasn't due to lack of effort or sophistication. The Abwehr had dedicated massive resources to tracking Allied invasion preparations. The failure came from believing what they wanted to believe, from seeing patterns that confirmed their assumptions rather than challenging them. "The enemy understood our methods better than we understood theirs," Ryle wrote in his conclusion. "They knew we would track radio traffic, so they gave us radio traffic. They knew we trusted certain agents, so they turned those agents and fed them false information. They knew we expected the invasion at Calais, so they confirmed that expectation with manufactured evidence. We saw what we looked for, not what was actually there." The report included a specific section on the June 5th radio transmission that had kept the Panzers at Calais while Normandy burned. This single encrypted message, which we intercepted and decoded, confirmed our existing assessment that Dover remained the invasion staging point. We now know the message was entirely fabricated, transmitted specifically because the British knew we would intercept it. They used our own success at signals intelligence against us. Ryle recommended a complete overhaul of German intelligence assessment procedures, increased skepticism toward convenient evidence, and better integration of multiple intelligence sources to cross-check for deception. His recommendations were filed and forgotten. By July 1944, Germany had larger problems than intelligence reform. The men who created the fake radio messages never received public recognition during the war. Security classification kept their work secret for decades. Holloway returned to civilian life in 1946, taking a position with a telephone company in Manchester. He never told his wife exactly what he'd done during the war, just that he'd worked in signals and communications. But the intelligence community remembered. In 1947, the newly formed CIA studied Operation Fortitude as a template for strategic deception. Soviet intelligence did the same, learning lessons about electronic warfare and radio deception that would shape Cold War espionage. The concept of using an enemy's own intelligence-gathering capabilities against them became a fundamental principle of modern warfare. Holloway received a letter from Strangeways in 1952, 8 years after D-Day. The lieutenant colonel, now retired, wrote briefly about the war and its aftermath. "I sometimes wonder if those chaps in the Abwehr ever realized just how completely we had them. not through superior technology or resources, but through understanding how they thought, what they expected, what they feared. We gave them the intelligence picture they were predisposed to believe. That's the real art of deception, not lying to the enemy, but helping them lie to themselves. The letter included a declassified summary of a 1951 U.S. Army study on Operation Fortitude's effectiveness. The study estimated that the deception operations, including the fake radio traffic, had achieved a force multiplication effect equivalent to 5 additional divisions. The delay in German armor response to Normandy had reduced Allied casualties during the critical first week by approximately 20%. 20%. In a campaign where 425,000 Allied soldiers eventually became casualties, 20% represented 85,000 men who came home instead of dying or being wounded in Norman hedgerows. Holloway kept the letter in his desk drawer for the rest of his life. He never talked about it, never sought recognition or compensation. But sometimes, late at night, he'd take out the letter and read Strangeways' final paragraph. "You were part of something remarkable, James. We fought a shadow war with invisible weapons, and we won. Not with bullets or bombs, but with dots and dashes transmitted through the darkness. We made the enemy dance to our tune, without them ever knowing there was music. That's a victory worth remembering." The German side of the story emerged slowly, as archives opened after the war. Reila survived until 1972, living quietly in Bavaria and never speaking publicly about his wartime intelligence work. His private papers, released by his family in 1985, revealed the depth of his frustration with how Operation Fortitude had fooled the Abwehr. In a journal entry from August 1944, Reila wrote, "We had all the pieces in front of us. I even flagged the Dover radio traffic as suspicious in May. But we wanted to believe the British would invade at Calais. It was the logical choice, the shortest crossing, the most direct route to Germany. So when intelligence confirmed our expectations, we accepted it without sufficient skepticism. The British didn't overcome our intelligence apparatus. They used it against us, feeding us information that fit our existing beliefs." He described the June 5th fake radio message in particular detail. The transmission about the 17th Armored Division preparing for embarkation should have been a red flag. The timing was too convenient, arriving just as reports of Normandy landings reached us. But in the chaos of that night, with partial information and conflicting reports, we accepted the intercept as confirmation that the main attack would still come at Calais. By the time we realized it was deception, the moment had passed. The journals revealed something else. Reila had been tracking a pattern of British deception operations since 1943. He documented fake radio traffic in North Africa, inflatable tanks in Sicily, double agents feeding false information about Italian campaign plans. He'd understood that the British were masters of strategic deception. He'd warned his superiors repeatedly. None of it mattered. The High Command believed what the intelligence told them because the intelligence told them what they wanted to hear. Modern intelligence agencies study this as a classic case of confirmation bias. The Germans had sophisticated intercept capabilities, experienced analysts, and access to multiple intelligence sources. What they lacked was the willingness to question their own assumptions when evidence confirmed their expectations. They fell into the trap of seeing patterns that supported their preferred conclusion, rather than examining patterns that contradicted it. Holloway died in 1994, 50 years after D-Day. His obituary in the Manchester Guardian made no mention of his wartime service beyond signals officer with the British Army. His children found the letter from Strangeways while sorting his effects, along with a collection of technical manuals on radio transmission and a small notebook filled with dots and dashes, Morse code practice, preserved for 5 decades. The notebook's final page contained a single line, written in pencil. 17th Armored. Prepare for embarkation phase final. Execute on signal. The fake message that helped change the course of the war. The lie that saved thousands of lives. The radio transmission that convinced an enemy to defend against a threat that existed only in electromagnetic waves and careful planning. The British government declassified most Operation Fortitude documents in 1976. The full scope of the deception became public. Fake armies, inflatable equipment, turned agents, and sophisticated radio deception. Historians recognized it as one of the most successful strategic deceptions in military history. But the human stories behind the operation remained largely unknown. The individual operators like Holloway, who spent months transmitting fake messages. The analysts like Riley, who suspected deception but couldn't overcome institutional momentum. The commanders, who made decisions based on intelligence that seemed credible because it confirmed their fears. The U.S. Army War College now teaches Operation Fortitude as a case study in both effective deception planning and intelligence failure. The lesson isn't just about what the Allies did right, but what the Germans did wrong. They built a sophisticated intelligence apparatus, then failed to question the conclusions that apparatus reached. They collected information professionally, but analyzed it through the lens of pre-existing beliefs. The final assessment, written by a CIA analyst in 1983, summarized it simply. The Germans didn't fail to collect intelligence about Allied invasion plans. They collected enormous amounts of intelligence. They failed to recognize that much of that intelligence was carefully crafted deception, designed to confirm their existing fears and assumptions. The Allies understood that the most effective lie isn't one that contradicts what the enemy believes, but one that proves what the enemy already suspects. The technology has changed since 1944. Radio deception has evolved into cyber operations, electronic warfare, and information warfare conducted across digital networks. But the principles remain the same. Understand how your enemy thinks, what they expect, what they fear. Then give them evidence that confirms their expectations, while you do something entirely different. The fake radio message that kept German panzers at Calais while Allied forces stormed Normandy beaches wasn't just a tactical trick. It was a strategic masterpiece, a demonstration that the most powerful weapons aren't always the ones that destroy, but the ones that deceive. Holloway and his team didn't fire a shot on D-Day. They just transmitted carefully crafted lies that sounded like truth. And in doing so, they changed the course of a battle, a campaign, and ultimately, a war. The final accounting came in a 1994 study by British military historians examining Operation Fortitude's legacy. The study concluded that the deception operations conducted between January and June 1944, including the radio deception that convinced Germans to defend Calais, represented the single most cost-effective military operation of the Second World War. The resources invested, radio equipment, personnel, training, totaled approximately £2 million in 1944 currency. The return was measured in thousands of lives saved, weeks cut from the campaign, and a successful invasion that might otherwise have failed. The men who transmitted those fake messages, never saw themselves as heroes. They were technicians, doing a technical job, moving dots and dashes through electromagnetic space. But history judges them by results, not by methods. And the results were undeniable. They helped win D-Day before the first soldier hit the beaches.
The radio hut in Dover, where Holloway transmitted his fake messages, was demolished in 1952, replaced by a telephone exchange. No plaque marks the location. No monument commemorates the work done there. Just another building in a coastal town. Nothing special. Nothing to suggest that this unremarkable spot hosted one of the most consequential intelligence operations in military history. But the lessons endure. In American intelligence agencies, in British military colleges, in any institution that studies the art of strategic deception, Operation Fortitude remains the gold standard. And at the heart of that operation were men like Holloway, transmitting lies that sounded like truth, creating armies that existed only in radio signals, fighting a war where the weapons were invisible and the battlefield was the enemy's own mind. They won that war, dot by dot, dash by dash, one fake message at a time.